Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for the May meeting of the Task Force on Broadband Access. My name is Brittany Beyer. I am the chair of the task force. Again, thank you for everyone for attending. We'll be using the bulk of this time to really work through the recommendations, but we have a few presentations if you look at the agenda. I'm just going to hand it over to Jaren to do roll call and housekeeping, and we will proceed from there.
Thank you, Brittany. Great to see everyone, and thanks again for attending. As Brittany mentioned, this is a meeting of the Governor's Task Force on Broadband Access, and today is May 11th of 2022. Just like to remind everyone that this is a public meeting that is being recorded. We do have a meeting agenda that is available on the Public Service Commission events calendar. And also in an effort to maintain audio, if you could just mute yourself when you're not speaking, and members of the public, if you could remain muted throughout the duration of the meeting, that'd be great as well. We do have a public comment agenda item later on. I'm going to now do roll call. So if you could just let me know that you're here when I say your name, that would be great. Brittany Beyer.
Present.
Marta Bechtel.
Here.
Tom Boron. Chad Young.
Here.
Jean Pock. Celeste Flynn.
Here.
Rachel Shemlin.
Present.
Brett Shepner.
Here.
Jose Martinez. Chris Meyer.
Here.
Chet Strebe.
Here.
Chris Herjong. Emily Dittmar.
Here.
Jennifer Schilling.
Here.
Andrew Faust.
Present.
Matthew Gabriels. Robert Earl Baker III. Lori Collins.
Present.
Gail Hike.
Present.
Shannon Clark.
Here.
Sal Carranza.
Here. Thank you.
Justin Hebner.
Here.
Douglas Cox.
Here.
State Representative Beth Myers. State Representative Jeffrey Mursaw. State Senator Howard Markline. And State Senator Brad Pfaff. All right, we had a few missing folks, so I'm going to loop back around to the top. Tom Boron. Jean Pock.
I'm here.
Thanks, Jean. I see you now. Jose Martinez. Chris Herjong. Matthew Gabriels. Biko Baker. Representative Myers. Representative Mursaw. Senator Markline. And Senator Pfaff. All right. I will turn it back over to you, Brittany. Thank you.
Thanks, Jaren. I just want to make a note for today. Usually Kristen Runge is our facilitator, and she's actually on the agenda to present. She is out ill today, and we do have Gail Hike, who's going to be stepping in for the portion of the conversation that does need some guidance. So we're very, very lucky to have Gail step in, and our wishes are with Kristen as she recovers. So that means that her presentation is off the agenda as well. We'll bring something to your attention. I think she's talked to us behind the scenes about is really important, but we'll have to wait for that. So we have two presentations right now. We have the PSC up first. So I hand this back over to Jaren, Alyssa, and PSC's team to present.
Thank you. My name is Alyssa Kenny. I'm the State Broadband and Digital Equity Director, and I have two staff that are going to present with me. Rory, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, all. I'm Rory Tukulski. I'm a broadband expansion manager here. Just started about a month and a half ago, so still getting up to speed, but happy to join this team and be involved in the project. So thanks for having me.
Great. And Jennifer?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Smith. I'm the Federal Broadband Grant Supervisor with the Public Service Commission Broadband Office.
Thank you. Jaren, you can go to the next slide. So at the beginning of the task force meeting this year, we did sort of a short presentation on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Some people are calling this IJA. I will say other people are calling this the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or Bill. Same thing. I think it's funny to call something that's a law a bill because I listened in Schoolhouse Rocks. But if you want to, so this is the IJA or the bill, and we're just going to go over kind of the impacts related to broadband for a few programs. We do the next slide, Jaren. Thank you. Hopefully you've seen this before. We shared this at the initial meeting. This is kind of the overview of the broadband funding that's in the law. So there's BEAD, digital equity, tribal dollars, and middle mile, and those are all going to NTIA, that's the National Telecommunications Information Administration. And then there's also these other three pots of broadband dollars that you might see: the FCC for the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is the discount for eligible households, USDA, and to sort of add dollars to their reconnect. And then there's this private activity bonds dollars that's a separate pot too. And so today we're going to talk about BEAD, middle mile, and digital equity. Can you move to the next slide? This is just a really, and what I should say, and you'll see this in, one, it's me being efficient, but two, all of these slides are actually from NTIA that we're sharing today. So you can see sort of the double logos. This is all just information that's publicly out there, through a number of their webinars and presentations that they've made available to the public. And so that the double logo, that's what it's about. It's we're taking their material and representing it. This is sort of the funding amount for each one. BEAD is 42.5 billion. And the NOFO, so that's the application or the instructions, will be out early May. Middle mile, again, early May. Digital equity, June, they're saying. The state capacity grants later, because it's sort of dependent on the first one. The competitive grants for digital equity even later than that. And then the tribal broadband connectivity program, they don't have an estimated application opening date because they're in sort of consultation with tribal nations right now as they're developing the guidance for that program. So there's no estimated date that NTIA has put out yet. Next slide, please. I'm going to pass it to Rory, and he's going to do kind of a deeper dive into BEAD.
Sure. So I'll start with BEAD. It's Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. I kind of think of this as the big picture focused exclusively on infrastructure deployment from the federal level under IJA. So skipping on to that next slide, if you will, Jaren. Really, it's $42 billion. There's no formal guidance yet. Like Alyssa said, there's a notice of funding opportunity. That's what they call it. That's kind of the first step in getting more discrete guidance from NTIA that's coming out sometime in the next week or so. So stay tuned for more details. But for now, I'll just give you a general overview. First and foremost, the big picture is this is $40 billion. That's a historic investment in broadband. Funding will be distributed to states, and states will be responsible for kind of administering and awarding to specific projects. For reference, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, the RDOF as people call it, that's about $20 billion administered by the FCC over 10 years. So this is twice as much, and it will be expected to be over a shorter timeline. So really a historic investment. Next slide, please, Jaren. The emphasis of this program is going to be targeting those locations that lack 25/3 access. So that's number one. That's the highest priority. But those without access to 100 up and 20 down are also going to be eligible, as well as anchor institutions without gigabit connections. So hard to pin down what that means exactly for Wisconsin in terms of how many locations, but we always throw around the number, maybe somewhere between 600 and 700,000 locations lack that 25.3 right now. It's also worth noting that in allocating these funds, there's going to be prioritization of high poverty areas, fast deployment timelines as is possible, and also kind of that future proofing by providing high speed and kind of sustainable network sizes. Next slide, Sharon. So what does that mean for Wisconsin? There's $42 billion. How does that break out, and what might come to Wisconsin? So there's kind of a couple criteria that NTIA is going to be using to determine who gets funding under BEAD. First and foremost, every state is going to get $100 million kind of as a base allocation. And then that remaining amount is going to be determined based on a formula. And that formula is going to take into account a 10% set aside of the highest need areas. And then the remainder will be just a general allocation. And both the high need and the general allocation will be based on a calculation of the state's share of unserved locations. How do we determine the state's share of unserved locations? That's part of an ongoing process that FCC is going through right now. They're working really hard to pull together a national map of premises level data of broadband service. Once FCC does that, we're kind of going to take the numbers they come up with. There might be some adjustments and dispute, but we'll take those numbers they come up with, plug them into a formula, and then every state gets their share of that amount. So stay tuned on the FCC side, but I think a fair estimate, lots of estimates float around. Wisconsin under BEAD is probably going to get somewhere between 700 million and $1 billion. Could be anywhere in that. So huge investment and really historic amount of money coming down to the state level for broadband projects. Next slide, please. So more about the grants process. There's going to be a local coordination element here. We're going to be required to have a collaborative process with local units of government, give them an opportunity to have a say and join in on the planning of the fund deployment. There will also be a requirement that the state or the grant recipient, kind of the project sponsor, will need to contribute 25% of program costs. So if we get $1 billion from the federal government, we're going to have to put up a couple $100 million as well. I think that's not too big of an issue. Typically, broadband expansion grants that we've awarded in the past have anywhere between 50 and 80% grant match in a lot of situations. So it's not uncommon for a project sponsor to put some money in as well. Also, we'll have a challenge process, a little bit different than the state, but we have in the past, as part of our grant rounds, had a process where providers can step in and say, hey, we already provide service to that location. Let's not overbuild. Let's target the money elsewhere. So that'll be part of this process as well when allocating the federal funding. Next slide, please. So more details on projects. There's a lot here, but I'll just emphasize a couple. First off, we're going to be trying to build service that's at least 100 up, 100 down, and 20 up. That's kind of a baseline, no lower than that. Also, a really big deal, I think, is providers are going to be required to offer a low-cost broadband service option if they're going to receive grant funding. So low-income folks will have access to funding in, will have access to this infrastructure that we help support building. Also, there's going to be some emphasis in terms of providing access to anyone who wants it and kind of uptime and reliability. So next slide. Lastly, this is where it gets a little bit more fuzzy, and certainly once we get that notice of funding opportunity sometime in the next week, we'll have more detail on this. But the big picture timeline for BEAD, right now we're waiting for that NOFO to come out. Once it does, the state will be able to submit a letter of intent to apply for funding. And what that letter of intent basically does is we outline our general criteria and our kind of big picture, very briefly, proposed implementation of this plan. Once we do that, we will be eligible to receive up to $5 million of funding from NTIA to start a more robust planning process to develop kind of a 5-year implementation plan for this funding. Once we do that 5-year implementation plan and FCC comes up with their maps, we'll start getting an initial allocation of our share of that funding. And then going on from there, we'll continue to implement it and receive additional allocations as time goes on. So a little bit unsure about the timeline, but I think in the 3 to 4 year range, we'll start having a lot of projects coming online with this funding and hopefully allocating most of the funding within the next 5 years. All of that, remains subject to a lot of ambiguity depending on how NTIA guidance goes and how FCC mapping efforts go, but stay tuned. So that's all for BEAD. I think we're taking questions a little bit at the end, so I'll toss it over to Jennifer now to talk about middle mile.
Thanks, Jaron. Next slide, please. The Middle Mile program, which technically is called the Enabling Middle Mile Broadband Infrastructure Program, has $1 billion nationally for the construction, improvement, or acquisition of middle mile infrastructure. And the purpose of the competitive grant program is to expand and extend middle mile infrastructure to reduce the cost of connecting unserved and underserved areas to the internet. As mentioned before, the NOFO, the Notice of Funding, is expected in mid-May, and applications will be open soon. It's important to note that the program is not dependent on those FCC maps that Rory mentioned earlier for the BEAD program. Next slide, please, Jaron. Eligible uses for this funding are broadly defined to include the construction, improvement, or acquisition of middle mile infrastructure. And this means infrastructure that does not connect directly to the end user locations. As you can see in the bullet points below on this slide, this can incorporate a lot of different middle mile technology. And it's important to note that this is technology neutral. Next slide, please. You can apply for these competitive grants as a single entity or through a partnership. And any one of these types of entities are approved for application. That includes states, tribal governments, technology companies, electric utility, utility cooperative, public utility district, telecoms or cooperatives, nonprofits, regional planning entities, native entities, and economic development authorities. Next slide, please. The Act establishes requirements for grant applicants, and that includes prioritizing how the middle mile infrastructure is to be used. Again, emphasizing a build time this time of 5 years or less, and accountability measures built in for deterring fraud and waste. Next slide, please. There are also award priorities that are established for middle mile grants that include leveraging and improving existing assets in order to try and minimize roadblocks like financial difficulties or row permits, that kind of thing, encouraging fiscally sustainable strategies for projects that show national security benefits, for projects that are carrier neutral facilities, and middle mile that's designed to enable unconnected anchor institutions. And that's it for the middle mile portion. Jaron?
It's back to me. I've got the Digital Equity Act. Can go to the next slide. This is also in the infrastructure in IJA, and this is just some really quick statutory definitions. These are probably familiar to folks in the task force. These are things we've talked about, but digital equity is the condition in which individuals and communities have the information technology capacity for full participation in digital society and economy. And digital and inclusion is basically all the activities that support digital equity. So affordable, robust internet, devices that meet the needs of the end user, applications, content, digital literacy, et cetera. So that's just kind of the types of programs and the types of things we're talking about. Next slide, please. The Digital Inclusion Act sort of creates 3 buckets of funding, and it's $2.75 billion. The first bucket is a state planning grant program, 60 million, so about $1 million per state. Again, there's some formula there, so that's just a very broad estimation. We don't know. We know a lot about our adoption rates, but we don't necessarily know how they compare to everybody in the country. Then from the planning grants comes state capacity grant program. So from the plan, you get capacity grant dollars. And then separate from that, there's a different bucket that's a competitive grant program that's really open to all sorts of eligible entities, nonprofits, schools, libraries, et cetera. And so there's 3 buckets, 2 that are sort of developed by formula and 1 that's just competitive national across the nation. Next slide, please. So again, I think I just talked through this a little bit. Again, the planning grants are formula, and they're to develop those plans to support digital equity and activities, and then build the capacity. Like what we've been saying in our office is to build that digital inclusion ecosystem in the state. So practitioners are connecting to each other, sharing resources, best practices are raised up and highlighted and intentionally trying to be replicated. And then from there comes that capacity grant, and that's the formula grant to support the activities that the plan has identified. Next slide, please. And Digital Equity Act has very particular set of populations that they want the programs and the plan to cover. And so those are households living in poverty, individuals of racial and ethnic group minority groups, individuals who primarily reside in a rural area, an individual with a language barrier, and that can be somebody who is not a native English speaker, or it can be somebody who's a native English speaker who has a lower literacy, aging individuals, people with individuals, incarcerated individuals, and veterans. And so those are the sort of targeted populations that should be included in the development of the plan and that the program should target. Next slide. This is that same sort of grid about the timing. So you can see first there's this plan. We expect the NOFO for Digital Equity Act to be available in May or June. And then it sort of triggers this plan development. And then from there comes the capacity grant. And so it's sort of timed out somewhat vague. The state of Wisconsin with the current formula will probably, this is just an estimate, get between $24 and $28 million over the 5-year Digital Equity Act program. And it's a formula based on population and based on the population of those target covered populations, and then based on our current adoption rates. So I think, yes, we have the opportunity for some time for questions. I know this is gobs of information and we covered not quite everything, but the ones that there's the best information about related to infrastructure. So I don't know if task force members have questions that they would like to ask, and we can make an attempt to answer. Otherwise, we can move to the next agenda item. If there's no questions.
Alyssa, this is Shannon. I have a
Oh.
question.
Oh, sorry, I don't know if somebody want to make a question, have a question. Can I have a question?
How about, can I have Sal and then Shannon ask?
Oh, sure. This is a super quick question. And in all these programs, one of the things that we have been talking about almost every time we talk about equity is about the adoption. How can we help, communities or people decide to adopt what we are offering to them? And I didn't see anything in these grants about funding for navigators, for example, that would help people adopt or understand what is available, and which I think would be very important once we have this in place. So that's essentially a super quick question.
My take, and I would invite anyone else, is that Digital Equity Act dollars would pay for that those dollars are really, they're around affordability, digital literacy, navigators, they're around helping those targeted populations adopt and afford the internet. So I do think that those Digital Equity Act dollars would pay for that type of program.
Excellent. Thank you, Alicia.
I would tag in one extra thing. I would say, especially on the BEAD side, that requirement that there's an affordable plan for low income folks might have a big impact on adoption in terms of getting some low income groups more access when we're talking about the BEAD funding. So that's another component.
Excellent. Thank you, Rory.
Shannon, I think I saw.
Yeah, just along the same lines as Sal. You look at the BEAD program and you look at most of the stuff that we have worked with, it's been a competitive grant process in terms of providing access and all of the things that go along with that. But the portion you covered, Alyssa, related to digital equity, and particularly digital literacy. Do you envision that being something where you would open that up, or do you think that that money might be state directed towards everything from K-12 to the technical college system to provide digital literacy training? And I look at a $5 million boost to the technical college system to provide. The way I learned about the internet back in the 1990s was a UW thing, Introduction to the Internet, cost me like $30. So, you know, I'm kind of thinking that we might have the right mechanism for some of that digital literacy training. Do you envision that that's going to be more of a state program, or that you're going to open that up for, or that it would be opened up, to a competitive bidding process? Because it does seem like we have the mechanism in place today.
I'll quick answer, and then I can maybe invite, I know Rachel and some others are part of, we have a digital equity, and I think that the state has many channels and many existing successful models that dollar could be used to support. But I really think that, it's up to the people who develop the plan and the final plan approval. But I don't think, there's nothing in the act that requires the state to create something new. You could use existing channels to get the outcomes you want. So I think from my knowledge is that's totally allowable. And I think that the discussions at the digital equity work group that the states had have been very focused on connecting those existing channels, sharing best practices and strengthening them.
Looks like Gail has a question.
Yeah, my question is on the planning process and the plans. We heard that BEAD and Middle Mile and Digital Equity will all need a plan submitted. Who in Wisconsin is developing those plans? And I guess which are they being developed by within the PSC or the governor's office? And when do we see what that plan is or have input to what that plan might be?
I think because the NOFOs aren't out, so the guidance from Treasury is not out on any of these. Certainly the Public Service Commission has been working hard, and the Wisconsin Broadband Office has been working hard to gather the data, bring the groups together, but there's no determined, planning process until the NOFO gets released and they sort of say what are the specifications of this plan and who needs to be sort of at the table. And so there's but certainly our office, this task force, right, has been working on planning and making recommendations to the state.
Great. Are there any last questions?
I raised my hand, just following up with what Shannon mentioned. Thank you, Shannon, for bringing this up. Not only the technical college system and extension, for example, have provided this kind of digital literacy programming. There's a lot of community organizations that have been doing it for many years. Urban League, the Latino Academy for Workforce Development, the Boys and Girls Club, whether this is going to be also available to some of those entities that actually have really good connections with the communities that they serve. So that would be very, very important that they have access to these grants to really expand on what they have already been doing and they know how to do.
Great point. Does the PSC want to just close out with after that comment?
I know I can see Christy has one more.
Okay.
I can follow up to Sal's comment. I think that it's a good one. And I think, we agree. This might be generally reiterating what Alyssa has said, but I think, as the guidance comes out, a lot of the next steps will be around the development of the statewide plan. You can expect the PSC to be leading a lot of the development of that plan. And I think without having the guidance in front of us right now, the way that we're reading this and the way that we're seeing this is that there are a lot of open pathways and ability for a state to take the approach that works for the state and that takes into the account the needs of the state and the assets and partnerships the state already has going, to your point, Sal.
Thank you, Christy.
Thanks.
Great, and I think the intent of this year's work on the task force on broadband is dovetails with that understanding as well, right? So I think we started probably as the infrastructure bill was debated and probably approved, but there was already, we understood that there's this need for understanding the active community network building, both sides of just building out the infrastructure, but also accessibility because it's such an important thing. And I think we're going to get to the recommendations, and I think those are hopefully going to be very pivotal. So we are going to move to the next presentation. We've been looking at those exemplars around the state of how communities brought the pieces together and solved some of their local broadband access issues. So we have representatives from the town of Cross in Buffalo County, and I'll hand that over to you all.
Wonderful, thank you. And thanks so much for inviting us. We'll do just a quick brief introduction so that maybe our faces will pop up on the top of your screens. We're really low tech, so hopefully if people want to come off of just screen saver or whatever so that we can see your faces, that would be great. I'm Karen Stetler, and I was the chair of the broadband committee in the town of Cross. So I kind of oversaw everything, and I was also the broadband connector pilot connection for the town of Cross. Jim, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Karen. Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Henches. I'm a resident of the town of Cross, and I was just fortunate enough to be on the committee and help drive the process.
Roy, are you on? I think Roy.
I am on. Can you hear me?
Oh, good. Yes, we can hear you, Roy.
All right. My name's Roy Freed. I am also a resident in town of Cross. Was asked to be part of the broadband committee. I was very pleased to because I do a job that's heavily in need of good quality internet that's reliable. And anyway, I was just proud to be part of the committee.
Great. So Jim's going to talk a little bit through just some of the highlights of what happened. I just want to emphasize that we went from 0 and then 10 months later to having submitted a $2.1 million grant to PSC. And so that just felt miraculous to us. And he'll tell you a little bit more about what we did during those 10 months. I'll take a little bit of time and talk about our experience with the broadband connectors pilot. And then Roy is going to talk about some of the things that we feel like resulted in our success and some advice that we would have for other groups that are going to be submitting applications in the future. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Okay, thanks, Karen. So yeah, just real briefly, I think we started out really in need, if you will. So a small group of people came together in September of 2020, and we attended our first town board meeting with the need, if you will. We're in the landscape that we live in, lots of valleys and bluffs, so difficult to bring us service other than satellite, which was very subpar. So we attended our first both town meeting and county board meeting to start the process flowing and start to gain information. In October, we were selected as one of 6 and the only township to participate in the broadband connectors pilot. We also started to gather addresses, so it becomes a big workbook, and people just have to knuckle down and gather addresses, and then we started the telecommuter forward progress. And in November and December, we put together a survey. We wanted to reach out to the people of the town. We had an outstanding return, so that served us really well. We were met with a little bit of pessimist behavior, if you will, from the town board in regards to what the cost of such infrastructure might require. So the survey was huge. We had over a 70% return rate, And then we also had the telecommunity forward and broadband process approved and adopted. So Karen mentioned things went really fast. You know, you're going to hear something happening every month. In January then of 2021, the committee and the town board met to discuss the survey results and to plan the strategy going forward based on those results. And part of the work that we knew we needed to do was we're going to need to reach out to providers. How do we select a provider who can do this? So we had our ILEC. We learned a lot about acronyms and providers that serve us and why they serve us and how they're governed to serve us. So CenturyLink was our ILEC. We also have a local provider, HBC, and another local provider in CCT. So we met with, first of all, we started with a much larger list than that. We probably had 6. We narrowed it to 4, then narrowed it to 3, and we met with those 3 and decided on and selected CCT as the provider in April of 2021. And then in May, the Town of Cross residents meeting took place where we circulated information. We did do, we broadcasted large emails, if you will. So we would send we tried to, when gathering addresses, get everyone's email address. We would do a mass communication about these meetings. We wanted as many people as possible at these meetings. We had 113 people attend the meeting, 111 in support of moving forward, and 2 not in support of moving forward. So again, huge success, even from moving forward from the survey. So we had a formal, then we signed up with CCT, with the town committing to at least $400,000, and alongside CCT putting that much forward as well. We had a formal request and a grant of $100,000 from Buffalo County. So earlier you heard me mention we met with Buffalo County. We applied for money that was available there, and we received that. In June and July, CCT, along with, as Karen mentioned, we submit the PSC broadband grant on the behalf of Town of Cross. And then in October of 2021, so just a year later, we were notified that the Town of Cross had received a $2.1 million grant to install fiber optic to every home in the town. November of 21, CCT presents to the Town of Cross at a board meeting that all is in order. Everything is moving ahead as planned. And as soon as the frost comes out of the ground and road bans are off, the infrastructure is going to start going into place. And I think all of us were looking out our windows as the cold just never seemed to diminish here. But sure enough, that equipment, those hydraulics are powerful, and they started just as expected in March. Fiber optic cable is now being installed all over, even outside my window. And it's wonderful to see the infrastructure taking place. We plan to be completely connected by November of this year. And I think that covers the timeline.
Thank you, Jim. I just wanted to say it was also very serendipitous that the broadband connectors pilots happened at the exact same time as we got started with our project. So as we were meeting as a committee for the first time, we basically submitted the proposal, the grant proposal for that program, and were selected. And I just want to say that that program was really timely. We were able to meet with both the WEDC and PSC staff people, get to know them, and also meet the other, for us, other 5 recipients, and to hear their process, to hear the questions they were asking, to be able to share information. And as we went through each of our steps that Jim talked about, getting the addresses, working on surveys, the different pieces, we were able to ask for assistance and some ideas. So before Roy put together the survey, he was able to view several different surveys that had gone out in other communities to sort of lift up the most important things that we wanted to ask in our survey. So it was really helpful just for that connection. The other piece that was great, and we haven't lifted up yet, but I really want to lift up. We had a wonderful sort of pre-Town of Cross example to follow. Milton had gone through the same process a few years before us. And with that process, we were in close contact with the provider, Gina, from Cochrane Cooperative Telephone, CCT. And so she was working with us, but also had we not had that, I think the pilot program really helps people connect with a provider. So to be able to understand like what a provider is looking for, I think having that as somebody who is going to be, looking at this process through whatever lens, whether it's a school or a county or a town, was really important. The weekly conversations were great, held me accountable for the things we were doing in Cross. And also I could ask questions. And then one of the biggest things that I just want to lift up, Jaron provided a contact at CenturyLink, which I don't think anybody would have returned our calls had he not made that connection to somebody at CenturyLink. So Jim and the team that reached out to providers was able to actually have a conversation with that person. So that was just, I think, a tremendous piece about the pilot. Did you want to add something, Jim?
I was just going to say, yeah, thanks for reminding. I think it was really important that we reach out to CenturyLink as our ILEC to make sure that they didn't. We specifically asked them when I interviewed them if they were planning to bring us such infrastructure, and they said no. We identified money we knew they had, asked them how it was planned to be used. They shared that with us, and then we specifically asked if they would have a problem with us choosing another provider, and they thought that it was in our best interest to seek out a provider other than them due to just the small project, if you will, for the project in Cross. So it was a great meeting, and thank you, Sharon.
So Andy, I see your hand up. Could we just finish our presentation, and then we'll circle around and you'll be first for the questions. And if that's okay, then Roy, if you want to just talk a little bit about some of the successes and advice for other communities.
Certainly. First of all, if you hear noise in the background, I have cars whizzing around me. I'm en route to the Minneapolis airport with a final destination of Portland today. So I apologize if there's a little bit of background noise. But yeah, as both Jim and Karen maybe alluded to earlier, I think our biggest hurdle was probably just a town board that was afraid of the amount of money that it was going to take to do the project. And in the first meeting that we brought this forward, they basically said, there's no way this can happen. It's too expensive. We can't raise taxes this much. And so that was our biggest challenge, is to try to take that town board and turn them around. And then also, I would say another challenge was to find out and understand what all the residents were thinking in the township. We had ourselves that knew how much we needed it, but it took things like questions, conversations, and surveys to uncover those. So the way that we uncovered some of these was first of all just being organized, and Karen led us with this very wisely, and she did this one step at a time and not letting us get ahead of ourselves with the process. The second thing I think that really helped our case is explaining to the town board that there was no money on the table until the project was actually approved. And that put them a little bit at ease as far as continuing with future meetings and conversations. We had very regular communication with other town residents. We did that through email, newsletters, phone calls, private conversations, and the like. And I think that was important too, just to raise the awareness of our community as to what we were trying to do. Karen, you talked about the Broadband Connectors project. We were one of 6 in our entire area that got this, and we were the only township that was awarded the Broadband Connectors pilot out of those 6 awards. So that was really quite something to our town board, that we'd gained some status with that and some recognition even from the governor of the state. The survey that we talked about went out to everybody in the township. As Karen said, we looked at what other places had done, both locally and around the country, and somewhat formatted ours to that effect. And that survey really gathered data from a great many people were willing to respond back. And that gave us the first heads up that there was a definite big interest in the township. It extended beyond our subcommittee and showed us that people worked in the medical profession, people worked at school, people needed it for their health care, etc. And we knew we were on the right track. And I would say the survey results were so overwhelming that I recall the town chairman, Lenny, saying, now that we see this data, we have to do it. Our people want it. And that was a key to overcoming the challenges. Last but not least, I would say, working with an educator and a guide in Gina Tomlinson from CCT, and she helped Town of Milton get this through. She understood the process and shared that with us as to what we can look forward to as the next step, and kind of kept us on the right path with that. So that was amazing to have her partnership as a guide and an educator. And then I would wrap it up on my side by saying that Karen and others did a great job of organizing a committee of people that had various talents. And first of all, just somebody like Karen that was able to take us one step at a time and keep us on track, very necessary to be organized. Another person on the committee was very tech savvy with the terminology and what it takes to put in broadband. Another person with communications and marketing skills. So we had quite a nice variety of talents that could be put together to create a package that would move it forward. We had somebody that understood the government, town, local, state, federal, etc. And another person like Jim that had the spreadsheet and Excel skills that could put the data together in a form that is easily able to be assessed. And we also had quite a number of people that were just willing to meet together to do the trivial things, the stuff envelopes, to get the surveys out in the mail, to make phone calls and things like that. So as other communities move forward, I think it's absolutely necessary to have a group of people with a certain set of skills that can help it move forward. And that pretty much summarizes the steps that we use to overcome the challenge.
Thanks, Roy. And my apologies, I meant to say at the top that we have all of this information that I can email to Jaron, and he can email that out to all of you on the task force. With that, Andy, do you still have a question?
I got lots of questions. Can you guys describe the geography of your town, the size, the population, number of households served with your project? Do you have an estimated adoption rate? And do you know how much money the town put into this project?
I can take part of it,
Go ahead,
Karen.
Jim.
I know we have 229 addresses. The the topology is we have bluffs and valleys. The entire township is you might travel 1.5 miles on a ridge and then enter 1.5 miles to a valley. It's very I'm trying to think of the actual square miles of the town. But we do have some people who are being served with some broadband capabilities via air, if you will, not satellite, but from a provider, HBC, piping across the river, the Mississippi River, to some success. Those people are being served pretty well. The entire rest, not at all. So the adoption rate, Andy, if I'm touching it properly, would I think the adoption rate is significantly high. I would say in the high 90s%, if you will. Like I say, we only had 2 people who I think said they were not in favor of it. I do see that they have bored a route under the road to that home. So I think
Really
even
think you're
though,
gonna have a 90% adoption rate, not to interrupt you, but
well, I'm not sure if people will just run it to their home. I really, I think it will be, I don't know, but I think we could find that out. And I bet it'll be in excess of 75. I haven't heard a single person who said, what if I don't want it? Okay, well, we're still being advised to run it to your home. You don't have to connect. But the service, if you have satellite internet, it just, to all of Roy's points, everybody that, I mean, COVID was what broke people, right? You cannot via satellite. I couldn't conduct this meeting via satellite. You have to go somewhere else. You have to go to your employer. You have to go to a cafe. You have to go to someplace else. And anyway, the adoption rate is going to be really high. So I don't know what else, Andy, did you have?
what was the amount of money the town put into this project
So 400,000,
on top of the 2.1 million?
correct.
Thank you.
Shannon.
Well, first of all, congratulations on what sounds like a really good project, and I think it demonstrates a little bit of what the committee has been striving to get is these grassroots efforts to get them to start. Interestingly enough, though, did you run into obstacles? I just happened to take a look. I'll admit I'm familiar with the area, but didn't know where Town of Cross was. So while I'm sitting here listening to this, I looked at that, and I also pulled up the RDOF maps. So did you run into any objections? And Jaron, I think you could probably verify this, but it looks like it was LTD Broadband was awarded RDOF in a lot of that area, particularly around some of the town across there, North Fountain City. Did you run into people that said, hey, the federal government is issued money, why are we doing this now? Somebody else is going to bring it in just a couple of years. It's probably an easier case when somebody says it's LTD Broadband that's going to deliver it in a couple of years. That's going to be a wireless play. But did you run into that where people came up and said, there's other programs, somebody else is going to do it. You just got to give them time. Don't be impatient. That does seem to be what I've seen in some of these projects. Local groups get together and they get told, well, somebody else is going to do it. There's the RDOF money or there's another grant program. Did you have that happen to you?
To some degree, I would say yes. I mean, Bug Tussle has put up a lot of towers in our county. And so there was a big, in fact, the county has been very supportive of Bug Tussle, and Starlink, of course, was something that people talked about. I do believe that people felt, that we have been 10 years now. It was CenturyLink that had promised to bring rural or fiber to the home and hadn't. And so I think there was the sense of, well, if we don't take things into our own hands to move forward, we may be sitting here for a lot longer. So I think that really got people going. I also really think that people who were in this area, this topography, which is terrible for broadband during COVID, I think that really just underlined for folks just what the lack really is.
Yeah, I think the point that I'm making is that you have a successful project by November of this year. There are other projects that, as you have been promised for the last 10 years, that likely will be promises for the next 10 years. If you don't do it now, who does? And so congratulations. I know Gina very well. Certainly, I'm sure she was an excellent advocate to help that happen. And again, just congratulations. And I think it tells us a lot about the work that we're doing here. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask one question as well. So Karen, clearly you were the chair and really the driving force of it, and great work. What is your role in the community? And so was the extension office at the table? We're using the Regional Planning Commission to a certain degree, economic development, either at a local, county, or regional level. Where were some of the assistants from that side of things? And just a question, just if you did not participate in the pilot, what likelihood would you be in the same position?
So it was through the pilot program that I was connected with folks like Mark Tallman, our Economic Development Authority person in our area. I think I just have to go back and credit having the relationship with the town of Milton and Gina Tomlinson with CCT, who had gone through the process already. And I will say that, Gina and the chair of the Milton Township basically walked me through what they had done. So I had that sort of framework to go from. And then it was only just expanded by the broader connections that I had through the pilot. And so I think that all of the pieces coming together as they did helped us to move at the pace that we were able to move. I feel that we would have been able to accomplish it, but it probably would have taken a lot longer had we not had all of these pieces come together as they did in a timely manner. Jim or Roy, do you have any other pieces to add?
No, nothing here.
Good here too.
Great. Well, thank you, all three of you, for your time. I think this is a really worthy story for understanding how having guidance from others in the community and how we can suggest that technical assistance is a really strong point in getting all of the communities ready as much as possible. I think that's certainly a focus on the community network building of our conversation. I'm going to hand it over at this point to Gail for the next step of facilitation. So just pretend like she's Kristen today. Today we have Gail, who's going to be walking through some important pieces that are starting us really down the road of very much clarifying the elements that are going to be going into the report, since we're at that point.
Thanks, Brittany. Jaren, would you share the definitions for us, please, so everyone can see that? I think what we want to start with is just a brief review of what we're talking about, the definitions. I know we've had a lot, our work this year really concentrated on that community, building that community active networks, the things we just heard about, all that good work that happened in Cross, and all those connections and technical work that are being done out there. But I know we still had questions during our last session when we broke into small groups, when we were talking about building that community active network. Were we talking about the switches, or were we talking about the human capacity and the people? As we took a look at the report that this group did last year, in the report, we called it Active Network Building and Community Alignment. I think that was the title. We didn't really have a strong definition, but we had a task that work group was set out to do. I referred to it as building community active networks, and I think that's where some of our folks who are on the switches side started to think of switches and cans and community municipal network, and that's not what we've been talking about. Not one type of connection over another, dealing with the switches and the wires. We're talking about the human capacity, the financial capacity, and all the strategies in the process we use to build access, adoption, and affordability. So we just want to make that clear, that that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about this building community active networks. Not switches, it's the capacity and the people and the financial that we're talking about. The next two definitions that we really wanted to make sure people were aware of, they were in our last report. Alyssa did refer to those again today. As we look at digital equity, the definition we provided actually comes from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance that looks at equity as the condition in which all individuals and communities have that information technology capacity for full participation in society. So that's really what we're looking at when we're talking about digital equity. And the navigators are the folks that are the individuals who help address and help the process, to help folks get connected, identify where those connections are, help them look at digital skills, help them get the equipment. So those are the 3 definitions that we really want to hone in. We're not today, just as kind of a guidance as we carry on our conversation. Brittany, any additions to those definitions?
I think we just wanted to open it up to the whole group. You know, we're moving essentially some of the items and the definitions from the first task force and clarifying where it needs to be clarified. So it feels as if the active network building is the one that needs the most work. I think digital equity, since it's sitting in a nationally understood definition, and I think that digital navigators kind of sits inside of that as well. It might not need as much discussion, but happy to have this opened up to the group just for response, and we can go from there.
Okay, no one's raising their hand, no feedback. I think with that, we'll just keep going because we have less than an hour left before our time is up, and we really want to spend some time on the homework. Jaren, you want to pull up the homework? I want to review. Kristen did a nice job for us of pulling up the homework. It's on not the Google slide, but the homework page. Let's see if we can we screen share that?
Yes, I put the homework responses maybe about 5 minutes ago in the chat. I can share that again if folks didn't get that. That's that first link. And then the second link is the Google Slides and Workspace that we'll be using today when we're breaking out. If you'd like, I can share the responses. Is that what you wanted?
Well, yeah, would you share the responses right now for us?
Yes, just a moment.
And I want to thank everyone for doing their homework. It's the best homework response we've had so far. We had 21 respondents out of, I think, our 25. And knowing that people are on vacation and you had short notice, we really appreciate that you were able to do your homework. We had 2 different questions, and we asked folks, you had a little slider to say, you know, how important these were, and these were recommendations. What you'll find on this handout is we had 2 questions. You had the recommendations from this year that were created by you during our work groups, and we had the recommendations. Question 2 dealt with recommendations from last year, and you were asked to rate those. Kristen combined those for us into one document, and they kind of fell into 4 buckets. And as we take a look at the first bucket, you'll see that we had 6 recommendations that kind of fell into that active networking that we were just talking about. You'll take a look at the definitions over to the side. As you take a look at the way they were worded there, the first column talks about the mean. That's the first, oops, sorry, on the right is the mean. And she has those in order according to the way they ranked out. The next one is the standard deviation. The smaller the number that is, the closer it is to the ranking, the higher the percentage it goes up in the ranking. You have the variance there, and then the variance, the minimum is the minimum number someone rated it at, and the maximum is the highest number. So you can see as we go through these that all of them seem to rate very high. We had 6 that we put in this networking bucket, although you'll notice, you might say, well, I'm not seeing all of mine. If you go down to the next section, which actually turned out to be our largest section, Some of those that were in networking and some of the other groups got moved to resources, because these are things that even though they may deal with networking, they may deal with funding, they may deal with policy, these are resources to help people achieve that. Things that we saw as either training or things that we could put in a toolkit to help people achieve their goals. And so resources was our largest number. Again, you'll note that the rankings there, most of them are in the 7. The lowest is down to a 6.3, but all very close and had a high number of rankings. Then we go down to funding was our 3rd group. And you'll start to notice as we're working through some of these, we have more and more yellow highlights. The yellow highlights were those items that were from last year's recommendations. As they got combined, we wanted you to see that we pulled those forward into this year, and people did rank those and where they fell in the rankings. And the last grouping that we have is on policy. And there are a number of policy issues that fell into play. Again, all quite high ranking. The lowest one was 5.89, but still, when you take a look at where they were ranked, you have, because the minimum was a 1 and the maximum was a 10, you see how the overall mean dropped. Okay. And then after those 4, we get down to comments. These are extra comments. You were asked if there were other things you wanted to comment on. These were extra comments. Some of these, we added them to the end of this handout. And if you open this handout in, so you're able to refer to it as you're working in your small group, we want you to be able to look at the different categories. I'll ask you to do that in separate groups, but then also this comment section to see if there are things in the comments that should be elevated to a recommendation or maybe already exist as part of that. We don't want to lose any of those comments. I think one of the things that showed up in the comments that we really haven't spent a lot of time talking about is there isn't enough tribal language in the planning and approaches. And so we really want to be cognizant that that wasn't identified specifically. So this is an opportunity as we go into some of those breakout sessions to look at how we address those. So those were our 4 groupings. Like I said, there really weren't any that were obvious that should have fallen by the wayside, but we're going to leave that up to some of the discussion that we're going to have next. Anyone have questions about the groupings and how they kind of fell into play? Okay, nope. All right. And so with that, I think we'll go right to the slide deck, Jaren. And we have the slide deck. You have the Google Doc. Jaren put the link in the chat. So you'll be able to click on that. And we'll be working for 15 minutes. And we have 4 of the PSC staff have graciously volunteered to be facilitators in your group. Jaren's going to split us into 4 groups. And in our group, we're going to spend 15 minutes this first go around. And what I want you to do is look at 2 sections. You're going to be looking at the sections that deal with networking and resources. You have 15 minutes. And what I want you to do is use the handout and use the slide deck to go through and ask yourself the questions of, is there anything that we missed as you take a look at the recommendations in networking? We'll do networking first, Send about 7 minutes on that, and then we'll ask your facilitator to move you on to resources. Is there anything we missed? Is there anything that needs further clarification? Is there anything, comments on the bottom of that handout that should be pulled over as a recommendation? And are there any on that list that jump out to you that you say, this should be our high priority? This is something that really needs to be taken care of now. Any questions on what we're going to do for the next 15 minutes?
Looks like Rachel has her hand up.
Rachel.
Hi, Gail. Excuse me. I just wanted to ask, so something might be listed multiple times on the homework under different categories, and that's why it's worded differently. Okay.
Right. Sometimes that is, and you might want to just, even if you make a note in that, as we go forth, and then we're going to spend some time on report writing, and Brittany's going to talk about how we work on that report, but that'll be important as we work on the report, that we try to clean some of that up. But some of them, it may be mentioned under networking funding or policy, but then maybe the tool will show up in resources. So there may be a chance for it to be duplicated, but we want to fine tune that. But if there's places that you're really noticing that as we work in networking and resources, if you just want to make a little note, that would be great. Other questions?
Thank you.
Can I just add to that we wanted to not winnow this down so narrow that we started losing something. So there is a little bit of repetition just because it was coming in from different angles. And so once again, when we're just about to turn to that report writing. So, and it is returning to report writing. And so that I think you are naturally seeing some of that duplication that gets eliminated in the report writing process.
Great, thanks, Brittany. Okay, with that, I'm going to have Jaren break us into groups, spend the first 7 minutes on networking and the next 7 minutes on resources.
Sounds good. And I will, once we're coming up on time, I will send a kind of a countdown, if you will, as to when the meeting will, the breakout room will end, and then we'll come back. So I will open up the rooms, and folks should get a directive to enter them. And I will say, any PSC staff or members of the public, or Gail, if you would like to join, I wasn't sure if you wanted to join one or not. I'd be happy to put you in one. Or whichever you prefer. Sorry to cut you off.
Probably want to go back and forth. And Jaren, if at 7 minutes, you could just send a note that says, please move on to the next.
Will do.
Thanks.
I think Gail, as a co-organizer, or excuse me, a co-host, do you have the ability to enter any room that you would like, or do I need to send you there? Okay.
It says join, so I think I can go back and forth.
Okay, just let me know. And any members of the PSC, I can let you, or I can direct you if you would like to be.
Thanks.